Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to talk about what it was like to learn Spanish in Barcelona. This video could be useful to you if you are perhaps studying just for a couple of weeks in Barcelona, intending to move there for a couple of years or perhaps even a longer stay. So what are the positives of learning Spanish in Barcelona? Well, there are quite a few. It's a very international city, it's a reasonably large city, and there are many jobs there because it's quite an attractive place for organizations to move their operations to because, let's get down to it, they can pay quite little because it's in Spain, which is one of the cheapest Western European countries to operate from. It's a very attractive place to try to lure potential existing or even new employees to. And from the point of view of living there, it's a very multicultural place. It's a reasonably cultured place, but I'll get into why, there are limits to that. Barcelona's got a long history of being a very creative and quite an affluent place. But the sort of more recent popularity is owing to the 1992 Olympics that were based there. Since then, there's kind of been a reasonably linear growth in its popularity. And I'd say that growth became exponential in the last 15 to 20 years. The beach, being placed on the Mediterranean coast, being straddled between the mountains and the sea. It's also a very beautiful city in some ways. Like, some people really love the Gaudi architecture. Some people think it looks a bit too Disney-esque. But as many cities go, it is quite an attractive place. Places like Madrid, for example, are a little bit more uniform, a bit more uniformly Spanish and have a lot of the same architecture, whereas Barcelona's really got some not hidden but quite open gems in that Gaudi style. I think Barcelona can come across as quite an exciting place. There's a lot of young people there. I think it does attract young people who perhaps are coming directly from their studies, or perhaps they come to Barcelona for Erasmus or to do an entire course there. You've got a good mixture of people from South America. There's African populations there, South Asian people, Chinese people. There's a reasonably good mix, and at least in my experience, it seemed kind of multicultural the second you arrive. Whereas the city centre of Madrid, to me, when I arrived, seemed quite uniformly white Spanish. This means that there's lots of other languages in the mix, English being one of them, but also Catalan, the local language. If you're watching a video about whether Barcelona is a good place to learn Spanish, the odds are that you have heard of this thing called Catalan. God knows that I read up about it before I moved to Barcelona. There's no getting around it. Many Barcelona natives regard themselves as Catalan, not Spanish, and as living in Catalonia, not Spain. By extension, many locals show a preference for speaking Catalan instead of Spanish. All of this will impact your ability and opportunities to learn Spanish in a variety of ways. It doesn't matter what city you are in the world, it's often a little bit difficult to make friends with locals because their lives are quite full. They haven't just moved to the other side of the world. They don't need friends as much as you. They're probably hanging out with other local friends they've had since childhood. Adding the barrier that if they want to take you under their wing, that instead of speaking their native language, Catalan, they have to speak Spanish, a language that symbolizes the oppression of the central government in Madrid, it can be a hurdle for them, to say the least. In my case, a big reason that I moved to Barcelona was to learn Spanish. I wanted to master the language before I even considered learning another language like Catalan. But also, the two languages are quite similar, and I was still at a relatively early stage of learning Spanish. So I was concerned that if I didn't learn Spanish properly, if I didn't consolidate my understanding and knowledge of it, that learning Catalan would mess up my grammar or my spelling or my pronunciation of Spanish. But as I implied, learning Spanish wasn't the only reason I moved to Barcelona. I had been living in Australia for almost 6 years, and I wanted to live closer to my family and friends in Ireland. To add to this, I wanted to continue writing songs and playing music. I didn't have the room in my day or in my life to learn two languages at the same time on top of the music and other aspects of my life. My life wasn't devoted to making Barcelona work to the detriment of my existing interests. I would also say that spreading yourself thin across two different languages when you've just arrived in a country is probably unwise. You need to have a reasonably high level in order to have a good quality of life and relationships when you move to a new city. It's out of no disrespect to Catalan or Catalan people that I had this outlook. Catalan is also generally just very important for Catalan people. Franco, the dictator of Spain, who died in 1975, suppressed Catalan. Catalan people were not allowed to speak their language. So it's a touchy subject. But the result for you as somebody moving there is that your opportunities for learning Spanish may be fewer. It may be difficult to practice Spanish because a lot of Catalan people would very understandably prefer to be speaking their native language. As mentioned, Barcelona is a very international place. You'll very likely make international friends. People don't go to Barcelona just to learn Spanish necessarily. There's so many reasons. It's not a country town. There's lots of reasons to move to Barcelona. It's an exciting place. People might love going to the beach. People might love hiking the mountains. They will probably be interested in doing the nightlife things, engaging in youth culture and night culture, all of that. There are lots of clubs. There's lots of live music. It's also a city that's very close to the airport, so it's actually quite a good launch pad to visit other places in Europe if you're coming from the United States or other parts of the world. I would also say that by comparison with other parts of Spain and perhaps other parts of Western Europe, Barcelona has a reasonable number of jobs. With all this in mind, the lingua franca in Barcelona is often not Spanish. It's quite often English. In the same way that a group walks as slowly as its slowest person, a group tends to speak the language that everybody can speak. Well, unless they're a pack of bastards. The ubiquity of English is particularly stark in the Ciutat Vella, which is the Catalan name for the old city. This is basically the city centre and comprises El Raval, El Barri Gòtic, and El Born. I lived in El Born for 2 years, and to be honest with you, that's probably the most English-speaking part. Didn't do it by choice. There were various factors that played into that. It can be a difficult place to get an apartment that you like with people that you like. And long story short, this was the best compromise for me in terms of price and location and housemates. The upshot of this is that many of the shops in Elborn are catering to what is quite an English-speaking kind of expat population. There are lots of residents from the United States and other English-speaking countries. I would walk into a taco shop, order something in Spanish, they'd speak back to me in English, even though they were Spanish speakers. That was just their target market. That was just the norm. But ultimately, not a great place for practicing even your ordering food skills. At the end of the day, this is what the staff were trained to do, so it's better not to take it personally, and in a way it might encourage you to go and shop in more local places. Particularly in the Ciutat Vella, it can seem a little bit like Barcelona caters more to short-term stayers or medium-term English-speaking people than it does to the locals, and there's a lot of truth in that. And one of the ways you can tell is through the prices for things. You have to be quite careful when you're in these three, I wouldn't call them suburbs, but inner city suburbs. You have to be careful about what shops you go into. You need to look at the prices, because once you start earning euro in Barcelona, those places are going to feel quite expensive. So when you put these two things together, the fact that the Catalans prefer to speak Catalan and that the internationals are more likely to speak English, you've got some obstacles when it comes to learning Spanish. For example, government documents, street signs, the foods in supermarkets, the food on the menu in restaurants, a lot of this will be in Catalan. In a previous video, I spoke about can you learn by osmosis? And partially I answered yes. Osmosis happens by being exposed to a language. And the reality in Barcelona is that because of the presence of Catalan, and also because of the presence of English, you'll just be exposed to Spanish less. I say that Spanish is less in the air, but to use a different metaphor, if the language you're trying to learn is water, you're just going to have less of it washing over you if you're in a place where there are other things competing with it, such as in this case, Catalan and English. If you're looking for another city in Spain to learn Spanish, alternatives include Madrid, the capital, or Valencia. Valencia is kind of like Spain's third city. It's smaller than Barcelona and it's smaller than Madrid. The thing about Madrid is there'll still be a lot of international people, but it's not subject to the level of hyper-tourism that Barcelona is. There could also be even more job opportunities there, being the capital. The thing about Valencia is it's a smaller size. It's a bit more manageable. It's not quite as touristy as either, I would say. Perhaps one of the downfalls you could argue about Valencia is it will likely have fewer jobs than either place, but you're also facing less international competition for those jobs. In the same way as I mentioned that in Barcelona, Catalan is competing with Spanish, you have to be careful about other parts of Spain. In Galicia, they're going to want to speak Gallego. In the Basque country, they're going to want to speak Basque. And in Valencia, there is a language called Valenciano, which is similar to Catalan, but I don't believe that the locals are as staunch about speaking it as they are in Barcelona. If the absolute first priority to you is to learn Spanish, I would recommend going to a smaller town or city in Spain to learn the language. You may face a bit more isolation, you may find it harder to find the type of job that you might be interested in, but it is definitely the best way to learn the language. There you've got maximum exposure, you're not having to worry whether people will break into English so that they can practice it. It's just all going to be Spanish. In a smaller town, you don't have to worry as much about there being other internationals there or people wanting to practice their English. There just won't be as much English or other languages there competing with Spanish. I think in particular the south of Spain would be good for this. There aren't as many other regional languages competing for Spanish. It's a proudly Spanish part of Spain, so you'd be much more in luck in those parts. I must say though that the ultimate to me is probably learning Spanish in South America. The reason being that, at least in my experience, English is just not as prevalent. There aren't as many tourists. The thing about Europe is that there's budget travel. Ryanair has contributed to this wave of budget airlines, and so it's very easy to get to different places. It's because of the EU, it's very easy for other Europeans to move to different cities and countries. So that means you've often got an international flavor that many South American cities don't quite have. It's just not as close to other non-Spanish speaking countries as European countries are, or as Spain is. As mentioned, I spent 2 years in Barcelona. The people that I know who spent 2 years in Colombia, for example, their Spanish was at a much higher level than mine was, and it's simply because of time spent actually practicing the language each day. It happened organically with the locals, and there was no question of whether they would be speaking some other language. To sum up, I would say that if you want to choose Barcelona for life, or at least more than a few years, I would seriously consider learning Catalan. Whether that's instead of Spanish or as well as Spanish, well, that's up to you. By doing so, you're more likely to make long-term friends in Catalan people. One of the things about Barcelona is because it's such an international city, people come and people go. And so if you only have friends who are international, you'll keep losing those people in all likelihood. If, on the other hand, learning Spanish is your top priority, I would suggest that you choose somewhere where there's fewer obstacles to doing so. If in fact you want to commit to learning Spanish in Barcelona, just be ready to back yourself and steel yourself up for the odd comment from Catalans who think you should do otherwise. And also be ready to make non-Catalan friends, of which I'm sure you'll make plenty, because there's lots of international people and South Americans who are only too happy to make friends and speak Spanish or speak English or whatever it may be. With all of that said, a little can go a long way. Learning a bit of Catalan can really get you in people's good books. Thanks a lot for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. If you had any experiences that are perhaps similar or different to mine in Barcelona, please comment. If you have any questions about what it's like to live there or any misgivings you have or anything like that, I'd be very interested to read your comments on this video. Make sure to take a look at some of my other videos, and if you could, like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thanks a lot and see you next time.